right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I see many friendly faces and partners and friends out there, but if you do not know me, I'm Dr. Jenny Schrum. I'm the Research and Evaluation Manager for the Office of the Food Security Advocate. Thank you. Thank you. So I am very, very excited about our second session. Since the day I started at the office, Mark tasked me with what's the framework we're going to follow? How are we defining food security beyond just one sentence? How do we measure it? How do we think about all the amazing work that you all do? Um, and what we adopted very formally, and many of you have also now shared adopting this, is the 6 dimensions of food security. So raise your hand if you know the 6 dimensions, if you learned this year, if you love them, me too. If you know me, you know I don't shut up about them. So we're very excited to have Dr. Eric Calloway here from the Center for Nutrition and Health Impact. Eric has led the charge when it comes to talking about the dimensions and how to measure them. And fortuitously, when we started working together, we said, did you see there's 2 new dimensions emerging in the literature? How exciting! Let's explore this together. So New Jersey's really formally adopted this framework, and we are the only kind of macro policy entity that's adopted this framework that very much lives in the literature and are enacting it in real life to enforce our decision making, and also what you've heard many of my words about appreciating the breadth of work that you all do. As you all know, it gets very easy to silo the types of work we do when it comes to food security because it's such a spectrum. And the framework really unites all of your efforts into one conversation and appreciates it all together. So it's not one person's responsibility to resolve food insecurity. If we lean on each other's strengths, resources, it really paints the full picture. So Eric is going to do a fantastic overview beyond what you all have seen me do. And what I want you to do while he's talking is, 1, think about where your work fits into the dimensions, because I promise you anything you're doing is within it. But I also want you to think about how you fit into food insecurity. As the panel really framed Eric and set him up really well to talk about it, food insecurity is not about othering people. It is about every New Jerseyan, every person in the United States. We all need to rely on healthy, safe, and sufficient foods. And it's important to talk about the issue that way to start decreasing the stigma, which we know is very prevalent. This is an issue that touches everybody, and we need to acknowledge it that way. So please give a huge round of applause for Dr. Eric Calloway.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks. All right. Okay, it's working. Sweet. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thanks for having me. I'm going to talk today about food security in New Jersey, the 6 dimensions of food security, like Jenny mentioned, and then some early findings from a study we're doing with Mark and Jenny around 2 emerging pillars. And I realize I'm standing between you guys and lunch, so we will stay on time, I promise. And Rosemary and I are going to be sort of coordinating moving slides. So yeah, you're perfect. So first, why is food security important? If you want to switch slides. Here's a definition of food security. And, basically means households able to meet their food needs comfortably and in a way that's acceptable to them. And the main thing to take away here from this slide is that there are many facets to food security, and they sort of give rise to these 6 dimensions that Jenny was talking about. So this kind of shows how those 6 dimensions tie into the definition of food security. And we'll talk more about those dimensions in some later slides, but that's those listed there on the left. If you want to go to the next slide. All right, so just first, why is food security important? It's important for a number of reasons. The panel gave just a great overview, and I know you guys know this already, but food insecurity, or not being food secure, is a key driver of our deadliest chronic conditions like heart disease and diabetes. And some of the main mechanisms are food insecurity leads to increased systemic inflammation, leads to compensatory behaviors like foregoing medication so you can afford food, and leads to compromises in dietary quality. If you want to go to the next slide. So in New Jersey, about 800,000 people are facing food insecurity. And as the panel mentioned earlier, and as you guys all know, many more are just one setback away from also being food insecure themselves. High cost of living and long distances to grocery stores are some of the key drivers in New Jersey for food insecurity, in addition to other socioeconomic issues that compound these problems. And so, what are the conditions needed for food security to be established in a population? We'll go back to those 6 dimensions in the next slide. So here are those 6 dimensions. And if you want to just click next, we'll just kind of highlight these 4 here. So these 4 have been around for a bit. These are kind of the traditional 4 dimensions, or you may have heard them called 4 pillars of food security. Since kind of the aftermath of World War II all the way through the 1990s, our understanding of the food insecurity experience has evolved, and we've kind of established these 4 pillars here, or dimensions. So availability just means food needs to be physically present in the environment. And then accessibility kind of takes it one step further. So not just does that food need to be there, people need to have financial and physical access to that food. And then kind of one step further with utilization, not only having access, but people need to be able to turn that food into a healthy meal. And then stability just refers to kind of how food security status can change over time for households. And then if you go to the next slide, these 2 are emerging pillars. These are kind of emerging concepts as our understanding of the food security experience has evolved. Sustainability refers to the ability of the food system to continue to provide food for future generations. Then agency refers to households' ability to act on their own food decisions. So these 2 dimensions were the focus of our research study with Mark and Jenny. And it's really the first study looking at how to conceptualize agency and sustainability in the US. And so before we kind of get into those study findings, I want to just move to cover some things New Jersey is doing across those 6 dimensions right now, just so you can kind of get a sense of how your work might fit into these dimensions and other kind of similar projects. So these will really be examples of the types of actions that can be done to address these issues. Definitely not an exhaustive list by any means, but here's some efforts that are helping to address availability and physical access to food. So the Food Desert Relief Program helps get grocery stores into areas that don't have them. And then the Retail Innovation and Delivery Grant helps to fund innovative grocery delivery models to get food into communities that have low access to grocery stores. And then on the next slide are some programs that address financial access, utilization, and stability. So SNAP is, federal nutrition program, a really key one that many households rely on, and New Jersey was the first state to raise the SNAP minimum to $95 using state funds to supplement the federal funds. New Jersey also provides benefits to families with school-age children who rely on the free and reduced lunch program during the school year. They don't have that during the summer, so this helps them during the summer. And then SNAP Ed funds programs across New Jersey that teach healthy, budget-friendly cooking skills. And then also sustainability and agency, the 2 emerging dimensions. So for example, there are gleaning programs that get produce that can't be sold, maybe because it doesn't quite look like it should, but it's still perfectly fine to families in need. And then choice pantry models where people can select their food sort of like a market rather than getting a pre-packaged box that may or may not meet their family's needs. So those 6 dimensions are all really huge issues, and none of these programs alone are going to solve those, but these are kind of examples of things that can be coordinated and scaled to help New Jersey families in need, and using the 6 dimensions as a framework for thinking about different ways to help. So if we go to the next slide, I'll get into some of early findings from our study of agency and sustainability in New Jersey. We're still kind of in the early stages, but I think we have some interesting stuff to share for today. So here's the 2 official definitions of agency and sustainability. as they relate to food security. These terms have different meanings in other fields, but in food security, this is how they're defined. And just some key things to point out here are that, agency really has two parts to it. So it's people's ability to make their own food choices, and that we're just calling food choice agency. But then also people's ability to influence the food system around them, and so we're just calling that civic engagement agency, at least for the reports we're doing. And then the other thing is sometimes people confuse sustainability and the stability dimension because they're kind of a little bit similar. So stability is more about at the household level and their changes in food security over time, and usually shorter time frames, whereas sustainability is more about the food system as a whole and more longer time frames like generations. So first, why are these things important? So, building agency means that you're building people's dignity. That was talked about a lot during the panel earlier. You're also enabling responsive policy making, so responsive to people's actual needs and getting input from the communities actually facing those issues, and also enabling people to make healthy choices. So, people really want to make healthy choices, but they're not able to due to a variety of reasons. And so here's a quote. This is from a different project, and it's a different state, and it was a few years ago. But this kind of always really stuck with me. So this is a grandmother in Tennessee who lives in subsidized housing. She has diabetes, and she mainly eats peanut butter and white bread sandwiches because that's what she can afford. So that's kind of what her meals typically are. She was talking with her doctor, and this is a quote from that. So she says, the doctor's talking to her about diabetes, and she said, the doctor's telling her, eat more protein, less carbohydrates. And she's thinking in her head, that's nice. I can't do it, but it's nice. They don't really understand. I don't have control over a lot. So I think, that quote really helps kind of explain this link between agency and health. And then just the last thing on that slide, and that's fine, you can just keep it here, just the importance of sustainability. Also, I wanted to touch on that's kind of a little bit more intuitive for a lot of people, but what's important about sustainability, of course, is that we can keep getting food to people and that we can maintain the livelihoods that are provided by the food system. So for this research project, we set out to understand agency and sustainability in New Jersey, and the whole point was so that we could inform policy actions and future measurement activities. We talked to 55 people, including a bunch of people who are experiencing food insecurity in different areas across the state. We also talked to a bunch of people who represented either anti-hunger organizations, food security organizations, or were in the food system in other ways, farmers, people in retail, people in food manufacturing. And so we analyzed the interview data, and then we have some themes we can talk about today. And yeah. So if we want to go to the next slide, just first we'll talk about agency. And then, so here are some quotes just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the things that we heard from people. So just kind of starting from the top, so the top quote is really talking about how a lot of people are reliant on the food that's available at the food pantry. And so when they are able to go to the food pantry, the food that is there, those are the choices they have. So that's kind of one limiter of choice. The next quote, as you might expect, sorry. We didn't practice this. So the next quote is, really, as you might expect, affordability is a key limiter of choice. If you can't afford it, you can't make that choice. And the last quote here is, people talked a lot about barriers that they encounter in trying to influence the food system around them. And then the next slide. So these are some, and I know you can't read that figure over there, but these are some of the key drivers of agency in New Jersey, at least according to our interviewees. And there's a lot here. and we'll be putting out some papers to describe all this info in more detail. But I'll give kind of an overview right now. Starting with food choice agency, these factors kind of fit into levels. So at the macro level, we had things like food economics, land and climate issues, the regulatory environment, and social issues. Then kind of moving one step down to the food system was agriculture. So, that of course determines what food is there, and a lot to do with what the cost of that food is. And then nutrition assistance programs, which help people get access to food and have other choices that they may not have otherwise. And then kind of moving down into the food environment, the food that's available and accessible to people, and then also access to programs that can help them. And then down to the individual level, things like food skills and equipment. So if you don't know what that food is or how to cook it, or you don't have the equipment to do it, then you can't make that choice. And health and cultural needs and preferences also, of course, influence choice. Then moving to the civic engagement agency piece of it, people had less to say about this because you don't make choices about influencing the food system every day like you do about food. So it's not an experience that's as relevant to people, but they did have a lot of really good insights. So looking at those factors, looking at the macro level, one of the big things that came up was this insider-outsider dynamics. So a lot of people feeling like, well, you have to be an insider to make any change. I'm an outsider. The system isn't set up to listen to me. And then social barriers was another one that people talked a lot about. If you working multiple jobs or you need childcare, you're not going to be showing up to a city council meeting. And then a bunch of other factors. So people talked a lot about organizational coordination across the state, and how if you make change in one area, a lot of systems don't talk to each other, so it's kind of a piecemeal process. We heard also a lot about organizational capacity to do community engagement was needed. Organizations needed more support. So a lot of organizations that work to address food security needed more support to have the capacity to do good community engagement work. And then at the individual level, attitudes towards government and political processes. So people feeling like, well, they don't care about me. I can't make a change. We only see them when they need our vote, and then we don't see them again. So all of those things driving people's ability to influence the food system. So if we go to the next slide. Wanting to kind of move into what are some actions that can be taken. And so kind of what our process was here was we reviewed a ton of reports that have been put out recently about New Jersey and that were related to food security. And we looked at all the recommendations that were in those reports and kind of mapped them to the themes that we were seeing. And again, this is there's a lot of information here to unpack too, just like the last slide. And so we'll have more information in papers that come out. But just to kind of give an overview, some of the short-term actions include making it easier to enroll in benefits, making benefits more impactful, promoting choice models in emergency food, and supporting activities like food policy councils. Some long-term actions were creating one-stop hubs for benefit enrollment, supporting efforts to reduce food production costs, so helping farmers out to reduce costs there to ultimately make food more affordable. Continue efforts to address food deserts and work to streamline food systems governance models, especially including models that incorporate community engagement and community input. And then next on to sustainability. And so here's some quotes that we heard around sustainability. So just sort of starting from the kind of brownish one on the left, these quotes describe issues like food waste. That came up a lot of talk about food waste. The red quote is really around kind of difficulties bringing up the next generation of farmers. And the blue quote, need for building and sustaining market demand for local foods. So these weren't the only themes, but just some quotes that really helped explain some of those themes well. And if you go to the next slide, please. Again, some key drivers here of sustainability in New Jersey, according to our interviewees anyway. So the first kind of grouping was about the need to consider demographic trends and demographic changes, the need to think about the regulatory and political environment. You know, are we over-regulated maybe, perhaps? Our interviewees thought so. And land and climate issues. The next kind of grouping there is about food affordability, food access, access to good jobs, and addressing food waste. And then the next grouping there was about sustaining local agriculture, supporting the next generations of farmers, land use struggles. We heard a lot about that, and the need to address markets and costs. Then the last little grouping there is about community food needs, so different needs that different communities have, different programmatic needs that different communities have, funding for food and agriculture, education, and infrastructure. And then the next slide. So again, took the same approach for the recommendations here. So these are, you know, kind of pulled from recent reports that we mapped to our themes. And so some short and long-term actions here. Short-term actions include educating consumers on food waste, continue efforts to promote local foods, educate on food needs of growing immigrant populations, support public education on farming and skill building for new farmers, and address land use policies and other barriers for new farmers. And then some long-term actions were include funding, infrastructure, and coordination around food waste, subsidize and build profitable supply chains for institutional and commercial buyers of local foods, fund climate mitigation infrastructure for farmers, and include climate change adaptation policies and plans in state and local planning, and investigate the need for increased New Jersey food processing and distribution capacity. And then the next slide, we'll just get into kind of some next steps for us with this research and this work with the Office of the Food Security Advocate. So we're wrapping up this first year's work, which again intended to inform action planning and future measurement efforts. And then we'll have some publications out, like I mentioned, where you'll get all the details of some of the stuff I had to kind of just skim over there. And then in this upcoming phase of the work, we're going to be focusing on measuring across the 6 dimensions and across New Jersey, really with the goal of informing, you know, what are the issues and where, and also kind of setting a benchmark from which we can measure future progress across these issues. And that's all for me. Thank you very much. Thank you.